Terrace. That's part of why the Prime Minister is in Terrace. Other projects will be in Quebec, Ontario, New Brunswick, Nunavut. More from that press coverage to come. Amy Bell is here.
And let's tune back into the Prime Minister in Terrace, making announcements about the next batch of nation-building projects.
Clean and conventional is low risk. Canada's low risk. It's low cost, and it's low carbon. And you look again at the Silicium as an example. Top decile, one of the most environmentally sustainable LNG projects. Rightly proud of that. With respect to the emissions intensity of oil and gas, the intention is to get that down substantially. That has been falling. We have the opportunity to do that, and we need to do that in concert, as well as in concert. I'll say one other thing, and we'll pass on. Is making our industrial carbon markets, the tier market in Alberta, work more effectively. And that's an important element for future investment certainty going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Caroline Bargu with CBC News. My question is similar to my colleague Aaron's question. 2 months ago, you announced the initial batch of major projects. How has being on that list helped those projects move along?
Yeah. Okay. So, and there'll be a bit of overlap with, not surprising, with what Don Farrell said. Part of it is moving in parallel as opposed to moving sequentially. I mean, part of the reason why a number of projects in the past have taken a decade or so before a decision is made whether to move forward. There's a term, as I'm sure you know, in building a final investment decision. Well, you don't take the final investment decision of whether to put shovels in the ground, metaphorically or physically, until you know whether you've got the regulatory approvals, some idea of what the financing terms are going to be, who's going to buy potentially the product, those aspects. Well, the answer is whether you're going to get the environmental assessment, who your partners are going to be, and how can they participate fully in the projects. What being part of the this process is, from the federal government's perspective, is to move our contributions to all of those aspects, to speed them up, to move them in parallel, with provincial governments. I'll give you another example, which is that too often, historically, you'd have a provincial approval process, and then the federal approval process would start. But different federal departments would start their approval processes at different times and not take into account what others were doing. So with respect to the projects that have come over, we're moving much faster. We're moving in parallel. There's a window, a single window for the people who are working on these projects to see all of the financing support. There's a single window for Indigenous peoples working with the federal government. Again, it's not the entire picture, but it's an important part of the picture to move that forward. And it moves these projects more quickly to the decision whether they move forward or not. And I can tell you personally from my experience in the last 2 months, just dealing with the proponents, it is very much appreciated.
My second question is, a number of First Nations oppose some of these projects, and some of the chiefs will be holding a press conference after this. What do you say to them, and how do you square pushing ahead with these projects in terms of reconciliation when there's so many nations that oppose them?
Well, let's be clear what's happening today. We are referring projects to the Major Projects Office so that all of the work is done, so that all of the information for that decision that I just referenced, the final investment decision for these projects, is available. And a crucial component of that, I don't mind repeating myself about this because it's essential, is full First Nations partnership and participation. Okay? And that comes with the knowledge of what the terms of the project are, what the possibilities are for that participation, and this is the single window that provides it. Referring to the MPO, the Major Projects Office, does not mean the project is approved. It means that all the efforts are being put in place from the federal government in order to create the conditions so it could move forward. But those decisions are taken by many parties, including very much First Nations.
So if the First Nations continue to oppose them, then there's a chance these projects will not go through?
Well, we'll see the decisions they're taking. But I underscore that when we speak to, with respect to Silism, which is a multi-phase project or multi-aspect project, the very considerable support that exists already for that, and it links into a broader strategy that becomes available in the Northwest Critical Conservation Corridor, including considerable conservation in the area as well. So it is linked. There are many parties, and all of those parties have to be taken into account.
Next question, prochaine question.
Yeah.
Bonjour.
Enfin.
And that was Prime Minister Mark Carney.
Donc, ces grands projets.
That was Prime Minister Mark Carney speaking live in Terrace, announcing the latest batch of nation-building projects. Now, later on in the show, we are going to do a deeper dive into the announcements that were made earlier today. Right now, though, we are going to move to another topic, and that is how do we narrow the gap between a living wage and a minimum wage here in BC? It continues to widen. I'm Amy Bell, sitting in for Michelle Elliott, and this is BC Today. Thank you, of course, for joining us on radio, TV, and on live stream. If you want to join our discussion, you can call us now at 1-800-825-5950 or hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email us at any time, bctoday@cbc.ca. And the BC Society for Policy Solutions released its 2025 Living Wage Report today. It's a detailed look at what it actually costs to make ends meet right across BC. The numbers paint a fairly sobering picture. Despite some government efforts to improve affordability, the cost of living continues to rise faster than wages for many working families. The report highlights what a living wage truly means, and it's not just about survival and paying the bills, but also the ability to participate in community life without that constant financial stress. So what is driving the increase this year, and how does this impact you and your family, and what policy changes could help to close that gap? Call us now. Just hit pound 690 on your cell phone or 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can email us bctoday@cbc.ca. You can also leave a comment on our TikTok live. For more on this, we are now joined by Iglika Ivanova, co-executive director for the BC Society for Policy Solutions. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming with us today.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on the show.
So first, can you just walk us through how you arrived at this year's, living wage figure?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the living wage is the wage that full-time workers need to earn to actually cover their cost of living in the community where they live. So it's community specific. And it's not just bare survival, it's a wage that would allow people to have the time and the resources to participate in their community, which is a basic, decent standard that, in 21st century Canada, every worker should be able to do that.
And
So we look.
Continue. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, so we look at the basket of costs of expenses that every household would have, food, shelter, transportation, childcare if they have children, adult education so you can retrain and escape low-wage work. And then we estimate what it costs in all the different communities where we calculate the living wage, 27 communities across the province. We take into account taxes, we take into account all government benefits that one would be eligible, and we do this for 3 family types: a single adult living alone, single parent with 1 child, and a family of 2 parents and 2 children. And then we take a weighted average to come up with the living wage for that community.
And what costs would you say are really hitting, people and families the hardest this year?
Well, you wouldn't be surprised to hear that it's rent. Rent is the biggest piece of any household budget in BC, of any renter's budget. And rents continue to grow faster than general inflation. So even though we've seen some dips in the asking rent in Metro Vancouver and some of our biggest urban centers, we still have the most expensive rents of any city in the country, according to Statistics Canada. And that just continues to drive increases in the living wage for people.
I do have a call that's come in that I'd like to bring in. This one from Gabrielle in Vancouver. Hi, Gabrielle. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing very well. So what are your thoughts on this gap between living wage and minimum wage?
Well, I think the biggest issue right now, along with housing, which I heard was mentioned, any city that you go to, not just Vancouver, the prices are crazy.
Yeah.
Is just the availability of jobs. We're seeing job cuts across the board, especially in the public sector and the private sector as well. And for a lot of young people, people in my age range and like your 20s, the big thing that I feel from talking to a lot of people in my age is just, maybe a sense of hopelessness a little bit. A lot of people see themselves getting, degrees, bachelor degrees, masters. And when they come out of school, there's just nothing really for them to go into. And so I think what we're really missing is just job availability and, not just entry-level jobs, but, the jobs that come afterwards, the promotions and the positions that allow you to actually be able to live comfortably, especially after, spending so much time and money into something like an education.
Absolutely. Thank you for making that point. And that is something that we hear, that people are coming out of schools, they've accumulated this debt trying to get their educations, and then there's just nothing for them. Are we seeing any disparity between younger British Columbians and older British Columbians where that gap really impacts them?
Well, we are seeing a terrible job market for young people, as our caller referenced. We are seeing very few vacancies, very few availabilities, and that is a concern. It's not just impacting young people, any new entrants to the market, anyone who is laid off, older people as well who get laid off from their jobs, don't have a lot to look forward to at this moment. But I think what the report we released today is trying to raise awareness of is that even the people who do keep their jobs or who do have jobs often their paychecks don't cover the basic cost of living. And so it's more than just needing to have a job. You need to have a job that pays a living wage.
Iglika, we do have a new call that's coming. I'll head now to Eric in Squamish. Hi, Eric.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. What are your thoughts on today's topic?
My thoughts on the idea of the living wage is, in spirit, it's a great idea. In practice, I think it's a poor one. What ends up happening is it's a case of a dragon chasing its own tail, and you keep upping the wages, and it puts pressure on the small businesses that supports communities. If we're going to start bandying around terms like living wage, governments of all levels should also start bandying around terms like rent control. The affordability crisis is not just a one-shot solution. So those are my thoughts on it.
Well, thank you for pointing that out, Eric. And Iglika, how do we, deal with that very real issue? Is we want employers to be able to pay a living wage to their employees, and they're shouldering the burden of enormous rising costs in rent, in supplies themselves.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and one that we do look into in the report. So the living wage, is a conversation starter about what it actually costs to live in different communities. It's we have numbers for Squamish as well. You can go on our website, bcpolicy.ca/living-wage to look up the numbers in your community. But I think it's important for people to know that this is a voluntary call to action to employers who can afford to pay a living wage. It is not, we're not saying that the minimum wage should be raised to the living wage at this point. We have employers, we have 450 employers, over 450 employers across the province who pay a living wage to all their employees and their contractors. And that's really important. But as Eric pointed out, employers alone are not going to be able to solve the affordability crisis. And bridging that gap or closing that gap between the living wage and the minimum wage, it requires both increasing wages and also investing in the kind of public services and programs that will lower the cost of living. So more affordable housing, universal, actual, $10 a day childcare, better public transit, better coverage of health services that are not covered by Medicare. We have excellent progress with the Canadian Dental Care Plan. So now low-income Canadians can get access to dental care, but we need that for pharmacare and we need that for mental health services as well.
And we did have, several government policies that did, come in that are aiming at affordability, as you said, childcare supports, housing measurements, tax credits. How much of a difference did those make this year, despite that gap widening?
Yeah, government support always makes a very big difference. In our report, we have a table that points out every single, government program that applies to households with or without children. What it contributes to lowering the living wage, and they're big numbers. Without child benefits, without investment in affordable housing, we're going to have much higher living wages. But what we are seeing with doing this research year after year is that government benefits just don't, keep up with the actual increases in the cost of living. And we also have issues where government benefits start being clawed back at incomes that are living wage incomes. So, $27.85 in Metro Vancouver. That's not a lot for people to actually cover their costs here, but it is considered, too wealthy for some government benefits that get clawed back.
A few more calls have come in. I'd like to bring in Ron now in Hope. Hi, Ron. What are your thoughts on today's topic?
Yes, hello. Thank you for answering the phone for me.
Of course.
Yes, I'm in my 70s, and I was lucky enough to buy a house in Vancouver in the 70s, in the early 70s, and I paid $17,000 for that house, just around Pandora and Nanaimo.
Wow.
And at that time, I was earning $6 an hour as a mechanic. So basically, I was earning $250 a week working. My mortgage payment was $125 a month. So half a week paid the mortgage for the house.
Right.
The current system that we're under with our government, our local governments, they collect the biggest amount of money, land taxes, through the value of the land. They are in a position of conflict of interest. They don't want the price of a house in Vancouver to drop, therefore allowing affordability for people to live in them. They don't want cheap houses for people, because then the guy like the chief operating engineer officer of Vancouver is making $450,000. The head of PowerX with Hydro is making $500,000. You know, so it's a big problem, and the problem is coming from our government. That's that guy that makes that $450 should get some money back to the people.
All right, Ron, thank you so much for weighing in on that. And I'll take in a call now from Chris in Victoria. Hi, Chris.
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me all right?
I sure can. What are your thoughts on the living wage gap?
Yeah, it's just going to keep getting bigger unless something changes with regards to how employers are paying their employees. You know, from my experience in my own job, as well as when I speak with people that I know in my life, you know, the cost of living keeps going up exponentially. But if you were to get any kind of a raise or salary increase or anything like that on a year-over-year basis, that is nowhere near keeping up with the increased cost of living. And so every single year, it's like you're getting a little bit of a pay cut because you're having to pay more for things, but you're not getting paid as much, and your salary increases aren't keeping up. But I don't necessarily see that in the C-suite. You know, the people who are at the top of the companies still seem to be making, you know, plenty of money and doing well with their bonuses and their salary increases. But as it trickles down to people lower in the companies, there's a bigger gap. And so until I see that change, I don't see any improvement in this area, unfortunately.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Chris. And Iglika, that sort of highlights an issue I wanted to talk to you about. It's that we often hear that certain groups are hit harder by the rising costs, such as, you know, newcomers and women and racialized workers. What does your research show about really who's most affected by not earning a living wage?
Yeah, you're right. You know, the low wages are not something that everyone encounters. Certain groups of people are much more likely to be earning low wages. You know, we did a study last year looking at how many people earn less than the living wage in their community across BC, and we found that over 700,000 workers in the province are earning less than the living wage in their community, and out of that, about 500,000 live in Metro Vancouver. Those people are predominantly racialized workers. They're predominantly women. And, you know, we also looked at age groups, and it might surprise some of your callers, but it's not necessarily something that is significantly more common among young people. It is quite common in, you know, in your core working age years between 25 and 45 to still be earning less than the living wage in your communities if you are racialized, if you are an immigrant, if you are a woman, especially a woman of color. So shockingly, I think one of the most eye-popping statistics that struck me, even though I do this research and have for many years, it was that half of racialized women working in Vancouver, in Metro Vancouver, half of them were earning less than the living wage.
Wow. Iglika, so important to talk about this topic, and I thank you for joining us. We'll have to talk to you again soon.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Of course. Iglika Ivanova is the co-executive director for the BC Society for Policy Solutions. It is 12:28, and this is BC Today. Long-term care facilities in BC have been hit with funding cuts to a pandemic-era overtime pay model, and providers say it has already resulted in reduction of services. The overtime ban has been in place since October 31st. Operators are calling for overtime pay to be reinstated or for a new model to be sorted. This morning, the Early Edition spoke to two providers, Three Links Care Society CEO Janice Boyle and Harrow Park Center CEO Rob Gillis. And they told guest host Gloria Makarenko more about some of the staffing challenges they're dealing with as a result of these overtime pay cuts.
We have been doing a lot of shuffling in terms of making sure shifts are covered. And the first thing that happened to us is we have an LPN that's kind of designated to help with admissions. And so when an LPN calls in sick, we will take that LPN who's focused on admissions and put them on the floor. And so that's been delaying new admissions into the facility. And so that is a senior that is now waiting longer in acute care to be able to get into long-term care.
And when shifts get run short of staff, that turns into real outcomes for our, not just our staff, but for our residents. Care aides called in sick. So we have a designated bath team at Harrow Park. We had to pull one of those members that are care aide that are doing the baths to do the bedside care to meet our care standards and our care regulations. That meant some residents that day that were expecting a bath didn't get their bath.
This is BC Today on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC, and on YouTube at CBC British Columbia, and of course on the CBC News app. Coming up in our second half, we're going to be looking at the flu season and whether or not flu shots will be effective this year. But first, we're going to check in with Rob Zimmerman for a look at the CBC local news.
Good afternoon. The Prime Minister has announced his latest batch of nation-building projects, which includes two here in BC. The Silissums LNG project off northern BC and the North Coast transmission line from Prince George to Terrace will be fast-tracked through the approval process. Mark Carney made the announcement in Terrace earlier today. Police in Surrey are investigating yet another extortion incident. Shots were fired at a home in South Surrey last night. It's the second time in less than a week the property has been targeted. No one was injured. And another BC hospital ER has been shut down due to staffing issues. The ER in Burns Lake is closed until tomorrow morning. It is the latest in a string of closures there that has left the department unavailable for close to 1,000 hours this year. And now the forecast. Rainfall warnings are in effect for Whistler, Howe Sound, and sections of Metro Vancouver. On the north coast, mainly sunny this afternoon with a high of 6. Highs around +1 with flurries in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, periods of rain with some sunshine and the temperature falling to 0. Highs around 9 degrees with rain or showers in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, showers with a high of 10. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, rain this afternoon, windy in some areas with highs around 12. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you so much, Robert. I'm Amy Bell, sitting in for Michelle Elliott today, and this is BC Today. And experts are warning that this year's flu could be especially bad. That's because a new mutating form of the H3N2 strain may make the latest flu shot less effective. This follows news after Canada lost its measles elimination status, and BC puts new limits on when employers can request sick notes. So we want to hear from you now. How worried are you about the spread of sickness this flu season? Are you seeing more people getting sick around you? Have you been sick with the flu? Call us now. Just hit pound 690 on your cell phone, or you can call 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca or leave a comment on our TikTok Live. And joining us now is Dr. Brian Conway, the medical director of the Vancouver Infectious Disease Centre. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Conway.
Good afternoon, Amy.
So what can you tell us about this mutating strain of H3N2? It seems like people that are getting sick this year are getting very, very sick.
Well, the influenza virus evolves over time, and we've known that for that's not new information. What seems to have happened is that a particular strain of H3N2 has evolved into this slightly different subclade K strain that is different enough that we're not sure that the vaccine that's been developed for this calendar year, for this flu season, will be completely effective. Doesn't mean it won't work at all. That's highly unlikely. It may be less effective, and the situation's being monitored very closely.
And if you were to get it, whether you've had your vaccine or not, does it make you quite a bit sicker than say your typical flu?
Well, H3N2 compared to H1N1 in general makes you a bit sicker, and we know this historically. So this is an H3N2, and we have no reason to believe that this subclade K is going to make you sicker than any of the other H3N2s. The issue at hand is whether in a vaccinated individual it will provide enough protection to, at the very least, make the illness more manageable than it would have been if the person had not been vaccinated. That's the likeliest outcome, but again, it's being monitored very carefully.
And we have obviously seen in the last several years a shift in a lot of people's hesitancy to get vaccines, not just influenza, but for many things that we'll touch on later. But even though this strain might not cover the latest flu shot, how do we convey how effective it can still be for people to yes, get this flu shot? And I guess who really should be concerned about getting it this year?
So if we look at what happened in Australia during their winter, our summer, this was the worst flu season on record, and it corresponded to a significant decrease in vaccination rates. So there were more cases, more hospitalizations, more deaths than have been recorded, and people were getting the vaccine less. So I think that that's a lesson for us to learn, is please get your shots so that we don't replicate the Australian experiment or the Australian reality.
Yeah.
So go and this subclade K seems to have emerged towards the end of the Australian season, again, as a result of under-vaccination. There's more viruses in circulation, more chances for the virus to change, and all of this is probably linked. So less vaccination, more cases, a more rapidly evolving virus, and it creates this situation. So under-vaccinating is going to get us into the same trouble as they did. So please run and go get your shot. It'll protect you against the other strains that are around. It'll almost for sure provide significant protection against subclade K. And if it doesn't, we're going to find out soon enough. These strains are going to be typed, and there's opportunity for us to course adjust and make a new vaccine to administer later into the year. And the less cases there are, with more vaccinated people, less cases there are, less likely that this new strain is to create havoc.
And I feel like we go over this every year, but it's always worth repeating, as some people clearly don't get the message. But what else can we do to reduce our risk of getting the flu this year?
Please stay home if you're sick. Don't
Yes.
share your illness. And that's particularly hard on parents sometimes, as your day is all organized and your school-aged child is unwell, and
Yeah.
you know that you should probably make arrangements. And having been there historically, I can tell you, that was always a difficult dilemma.
Yes.
Do I send them to school anyway, or do I rearrange my day to accommodate this? And please rearrange your day. Think about what you will have to do. Think ahead of time how you're going to rearrange your day. So stay home if you're sick. Wash your hands. This virus spreads very easily, and other viruses spread is you're infected, you touch your nose, you got the virus on your hands, you shake hands, and the other person's hand, they touch their nose and they infect themselves. So a good way of interrupting this cycle is to really wash your hands. And in some cases, it still is appropriate to sort of have a mask on your person if you have to be out in public sick, especially in smaller environments, indoors. I'm not saying we're going back to pandemic restrictions, because we aren't. But think about wearing a mask. And I think if we do for sure the first two and think about having a mask around, this is going to be helpful.
I was sick earlier in the month, and I did find just by wearing a mask in a few situations that were very sort of tightly populated, it almost was a sign for people to themselves just choose to stay clear from me, because they knew I was wearing that likely because I was sick. So it sort of worked twofold. I do have a call that's come in, Dr. Conway, from Rob in Vancouver. Hi, Rob. Do you have a comment or a question on this?
Yeah, my question is, okay, my understanding is the flu and most really bad viruses for humans are these trans-species ones. They originate in other species, and then our immune system, I guess, doesn't know how to deal with them. So would we have a significant reduction in these type of diseases if most people went vegetarian or vegan and we no longer had all this close contact livestock situations between humans and animals?
Well, thank you for that question. And Dr. Conway, obviously, I'll leave that for you to answer.
Influenza virus, as it now stands, this is a human-to-human virus, the one that we're talking about. We're concerned about transspecies spread from birds, the avian flu recombining with human flu to create a new virus. And you're quite right to point out that these transspecies transmissions of virus are particularly problematic.
Right.
If we think about HIV as a good example, that was probably originally a monkey or chimpanzee virus that transmitted to humans at some point in the early part of the 20th century, as a good example of what can happen if these transmissions occur. For the person that's eating meat, that isn't the mode of transmission. The virus would have been significantly or completely, I should say, inactivated by the time the meat gets to you. The risk is the contact of a human with the live animals and those kinds of transmissions. And that we need to pay attention to. And I think we really are. When we saw avian flu be transmitted to dairy cows in the United States, it led to significant restrictions in how humans interacted with dairy cows. So I think that's really the contact we're most concerned about.
All right, thank you for that. I do have an email that's come in from Alfred Hugh Taylor, and he says, nothing changes for us seniors. Regular boosters, shop early when stores are less crowded, no dining out in busy restaurants, N95 mask on the bus, and carry hand sanitizer. Same old stuff. It sounds, Doctor, like Alfred has the right idea when it comes to trying to stay healthy during the flu season. I mentioned in the intro, but I did want to ask you about it. BC has just put new limits on when employers can ask for sick notes. They can't ask for a note for the first 2 health-related absences up to 5 consecutive days of year. What do you think of that change? Will that, make it easier for people to stay home when they're sick and not continue to spread the virus?
So first, to backtrack to the email, rock on, Alfred. I love it.
Alfred knows what he's doing.
As far as these restrictions, there's a couple of issues at hand here. One is trying to establish relationships of trust in the workplace where people who take 1 or 2 days off, and I come back to the parent that potentially has to stay home to deal with an unwell child, that we have some relationship of trust that doesn't create too much antagonism by requesting justifications for everything we do. That being said, you're still allowed, and I would encourage you as an employer to ask, why were you off? And is there something that I should be worried about in the workplace? Are you recovering from the flu? Are you really all better? Or do you feel like you're still dragging yourself into work slightly unwell, and have the responsibility as an employer to sort of say, you know what, I really don't want you in my workplace. It's for the good of your colleagues and it's for your own good. So let's talk about how we can make that occur without it inconveniencing you personally, financially, or otherwise. And I think that'll lead to much healthier workplaces where people feel that it's okay to stay off until they're fully better, and that's what we need to do, especially during respiratory virus season.
Absolutely. Just to touch on other infectious disease news, of course, we mentioned last week that Canada lost its measles elimination status, and there is still an outbreak in northeastern BC. How do you feel about our ability to regain that status in Canada?
Well, I like to be hopeful. I mean, we need to get vaccination rates back up to where they were historically. That's what led us to being declared measles free in 1998. That's a quarter of a century ago or more. And if we really have that good news discussion about the benefits of vaccine to show that this really worked historically, it'll work again if we get the vaccination rates up and continue with the good public health measures to isolate cases, eliminate domestic transmission. If we do that for 12 months, we get the status back, and it's possible. We just need to tell the good news stories about vaccines. There's no smallpox because of vaccines. I've never seen a case of polio because of vaccines. Maternal fetal transmission of hepatitis B eliminated because of vaccines, and on, that vaccines have changed the face of the world. And if you take your foot off the gas, you have measles as we're now seeing it.
Well, and you know, I don't want to rain on your good news, but that was a question I wanted to ask. We know we've, you know, eliminated so many of these diseases through vaccination, but are you concerned at all about a resurgence in some of the diseases that we've eliminated in the past, such as, you know, polio? How do we sort of weigh against that and make sure that doesn't happen?
Three things. First is, let's tell the good news story through social media. I've not seen too many posts that explain why there's no smallpox, what these vaccines have done to help individuals, families, communities, societies. Let's tell the good news stories using the media of the day. Let us not accept lies. If someone comes out with something about vaccines that says that they always cause this or the risk of this is very high, let us honor the fact they brought it up, but tell them, you know, I don't know where you got this, but it's not true. And when people have hesitancy about vaccination, let's have a respectful dialogue, a true dialogue, trying to understand how they got to where they are, and help through joint decision making potentially get back to the vaccination rates that we enjoyed before. Not by confronting or shaming or anything, but let's have an honest discussion. And I think if we do these things, we will do much better.
And that's such a valid point to make, because it is something that has become so sensitive for people on both sides, that there is this hesitancy to have these open dialogues, which again just allows people to sort of stay in their own camps and not have these open discussions. So I do hope that those can continue as well. I really appreciate you joining us, Dr. Conway. It's always great to speak with you, and always such a timely reminder as we're into that time of year where every little sniffle and sneeze that you hear is cause for suspicion and concern.
Well, less suspicion, less concern if you're vaccinated.
Fair enough. And maybe a little more empathy. Thanks, Dr. Conway.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That is Dr. Brian Conway. He is the medical director of the Vancouver Infectious Diseases Center. It is 12:46. And of course, thanks for sticking with us on CBC Radio 1 and CBC Television. I'm Amy Bell, sitting in today for Michelle Elliott on BC Today. Now, on yesterday's show, we discussed the federal government's announcement of several nation-building projects and what you thought about BC Cellphone LNG project being on that list. Here's what some of you had to say. From JM, I was looking at some projections on revenue. China doesn't want LNG, and competition means a second terminal won't make money. Is Carney doing the math, or do Asian investors take the fall? Wanda wrote, why is no one talking about how fracking uses exorbitant amounts of clean water and contaminates it so it can never be used again? When BC is facing more severe droughts every summer, where farmers don't have enough water to grow food, when we're experiencing horrific community-destroying wildfires every summer, and we are being told to turn the tap off to brush our teeth. How dare government ignore this issue when talking about extracting more fossil fuels? Dave said, I find it surprising that more investment has not been made to tap into BC's emission-free, unlimited, shallow volcanic heat to power turbine generators. Wells could be drilled adjacent to shallow volcanic sites. Carol Ann said, not to mention that fresh water is being blasted into fracking wells. And I recall reading somewhere that they are paying just $2.25 per million liters for that fresh water. When I do the math for what we residents pay for water, I would be paying $12,500 for a million liters of water. And Lisa wrote, it might be fine to say the rules are good. The real issue is they need to be followed. Thank you so much to everybody that joined our conversation. And yes, as we know, Prime Minister Mark Carney was in northwestern BC today to announce the latest slew of nation-building projects. And for more, we are joined by our provincial affairs reporter, Katie DeRosa. Hello, Katie.
Hi, Amy.
Busy day for you?
It is, although I'm not in Terrace, so not as busy as the reporters up there.
Fair, fair. So what are some of the key highlights from Carney's appearance today?
Well, very significant that there's two more BC projects on the major projects list, the Cellphone's LNG project off northern BC and the North Coast Transmission Line, which will double the electricity from Prince George to Terrace. And so Carney praised the Cellphone's LNG project, which is a joint venture between the Nisga'a Nation and Texas-based Western LNG.
Right.
He says it will be one of the world's cleanest operations, so a little bit of a preemptive to some of the environmental criticisms that I'll get to later. But the two projects are connected, given that the North Coast Transmission Line will double the electricity to power those LNG projects, critical mineral mines, and other resource projects. So here's what Carney had to say about that.
We'll strengthen our position as a global leader in clean energy and a leader in critical minerals. Now, what's crucial for this is the North Coast Transmission Line, one of the reasons we're here at BC Hydro. It's required to unlock this potential. And to help get it going, the Canada Infrastructure Bank is today announcing a loan of $140 million to BC Hydro.
Now, the Prime Minister was also asked how, other than these loans, how does being on the major project list actually help these projects? He says that it will fast-track the various level of approvals, but, I will note the Cellphone's project has already been given the green light in terms of the environmental approval from Ottawa and BC. And that approval by Ottawa on the environmental certificate is being challenged by two First Nations. So these projects are still years away, and there's this this legal challenge looming.
Well, and I wanted to say, what are the critics saying about these two projects? As you highlighted, there's already some strong opposition.
Yeah, so Carney's press conference was immediately followed by another press conference with First Nations leaders and environmental advocates who are very strongly opposed. The opponents include members from the Gittinyao, the Giksan, and the Wet'suwet'en Nations, which have launched a legal challenge to the Prince Rupert gas transmission line. Now, that's different from the North Coast Transmission Line, but that is the pipeline that will supply natural gas to the Cellphone's facility. And so they say that despite the participation of the Nisga'a First Nation, the financial windfall from this project will largely go to Western LNG, which is a Texas-based company. And environmental groups have said that the province and the federal government are essentially subsidizing the fossil fuel industry instead of going forward on more clean energy projects.
And what did Premier Eby have to say in regards to BC being the site of two nation-building projects?
Well, Evie says he's thrilled, and he's not surprised because he says BC has the best projects. They're real projects, which is a slight dig to the pipeline, which he keeps calling a fantasy project, the pipeline from Alberta to BC's northwest coast. And he says that the province is going to be the economic engine for the country. So he says the North Coast transmission line will be key to growing the clean energy sector, enriching First Nations who have a financial stake along the route. And we know that the Premier has made the North Coast transmission line a key priority for his government, saying he will stake his entire government on it, and even mentioned about a week ago that he would be willing to go to an early election if he can't get the legislation to support that transmission line built. Now, again, he has the majority, a slight majority to pass that, so we likely won't see that situation. But it's just quite significant that there's another 2 BC projects on the list. Remember that the first major project list included the LNG Canada and the West Chris mine in BC. So this is quite a get for BC again.
Well, and I noticed, along with many other people, that a BC-Alberta pipeline was not on the list, and that seemed to be a bit of a surprise for many. Were there any other surprises?
Well, that's right. Alberta shut out again. And really, Alberta only wants one major project, and that's another oil pipeline from the oil sands to BC's northwest coast. But I guess in terms of the timing, Alberta hasn't even submitted their formal proposal on the pipeline. They have aimed for spring to submit that proposal to the Major Projects Office. And we know that last week, Carney made that off-the-cuff comment to the Canadian Club of Toronto, where he said, he was asked about the pipeline, and he said, it's going to happen. And then he kind of backtracked. He said, well, something's going to happen. So that was a major showing of his cards. And so I would say if he's playing 4D chess, maybe he's rewarding BC with several projects in order to lessen the blow down the road if he is planning to lift the tanker ban in northern BC and pave the way for a pipeline. So, again, that's all speculation. We don't have any confirmation, but it's kind of good to kind of to warm up your biggest critics on a major project that BC EB has been opposed to.
Well, and I think one thing we've learned about politics is it's a lot of politicking. You can't always take things just at face value.
Exactly. So I'm sure there's again, the Prime Minister said here's the reasons why the North Coast transmission line, why the LNG project were approved, but someone's got to be looking at the strategy behind it, and Alberta's got to be waiting for its, when is it going to make the list? And again, it only wants one thing.
We'll see if it happens for them, but obviously we'll keep an eye on everything, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much, Katie.
Thanks, Amy.
And we'll head now live to Premier David Eby, who is speaking right now in Langley.
A figment of a communication person's mind in Alberta. And it has no connection to real investment in our country or in our province. If it goes ahead, it will only be because it is fully funded by taxpayers to the tune of $40 to $50 billion. And we already have a publicly owned pipeline that is not operating at capacity and could take on significant additional capacity. I remain frustrated that this appears to be an ongoing issue for Premier Smith. We've got so many things to work on together that could make a meaningful difference for her province and ours, whether it's around electricity rates in Alberta, whether it's around access to Tidewater for key products, whether it's around just working closely together as each other's major trading partners in Canada. So the door remains open, but let's be honest with ourselves, that pipeline is not happening, and that's why it's not on the list.
And do you have a follow-up, Yasmin?
Yes, thank you. Specifically on the Cellphone's LNG project, when Carney was asked about the opposition to it by some Indigenous groups, he said that at the end of the day, it's not Ottawa that decides where projects go, it's the parties that decide. But how, from your perspective, how do you think this project can go ahead when it's facing so much opposition from some Indigenous groups as well as environmental groups and to legal challenges?
This is a remarkable and amazing country and province that we live in. It's got a diversity of viewpoints, and we all commit to working together to try to lift each other up and finding a path forward. There will be lots of discussions about the Cellphone LNG project, about lots of other projects. But what is not debatable is if we don't build a project like Cellphone LNG, that Donald Trump will build an LNG plant in Alaska that will not have any of the Indigenous participation, any of the economic benefits for British Columbia or Canada, any of the environmental standards, including a 50% reduction in methane leakage because of our regulations, any of the contributions towards low carbon technologies and opportunities here in the province.
And that is Premier David Eby reacting to Prime Minister Mark Carney's latest round of nation-building projects. He was speaking in Langley, and that is our show today.